An excerpt from my extended essay, 19 Arabs with Boxcutters. You can read it in its entirety at 19arabs.blogspot.com. The section I'm reading from is entitled 9/11 Liars, and I'm focusing on the section specifically with regard to Ted Olson. Finally, and perhaps most egregiously, let us consider the claims of Ted Olson. Olson held the title of Solicitor General in President George W. Bush's cabinet. According to the 9/11 OS official story, Olson's wife Barbara, a conservative columnist and pundit, was one of the passengers on American Airlines Flight 77. She allegedly perished when that plane allegedly struck the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001. Mere days later, Olson gave two very high-profile interviews, one to CNN's Larry King, the other to ABC's Barbara Walters. The story he told of the final moments spent on the phone with his wife was a heartrending one. Barbara called his office from the plane, Olson said, and told him that her flight had been hijacked and that everyone from first class had been forcibly moved to the back of the plane, along with the pilots. The hijackers were Middle Eastern-looking men armed with knives and box cutters, she said. She wanted to know what she could do. The call abruptly ended, but she called back a moment later, and they conversed for about the span of a minute. Ted told Barbara that two other planes had been hijacked by terrorists and had crashed into the Twin Towers a short time earlier. Each told the other, "I love you," before the line went dead again for the last time. Shortly thereafter, Ted received news that Barbara's plane had flown to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., killing everyone on board. In both of these interviews, Olson's demeanor remains curiously unemotional, his affect largely flat. Considering that he lost his beloved wife mere days prior, one would expect his grief to be overpowering. Indeed, I dare say that most who have suffered such a loss would be in no mood to grant two television interviews and speak to millions of viewers about the intimate details of a devastating final conversation with one's newly deceased wife. Instead, the freshly widowed husband stoically relates information which would soon largely inform the, quote, official story, namely that Middle Eastern men with knives and box cutters forced the pilots out of the cockpit in order to crash the plane into a landmark site. The problem with Olson's account is that it has been conclusively shown to have been completely fabricated. Records indicate that Barbara Olson's cell phone, in fact, made no calls during the time when Ted Olson claimed she called his office twice. In fact, she apparently tried to place a call during that span of time, but was unsuccessful. This shouldn't be surprising, even if we grant, as per the 9/11 OS official story, that Barbara was indeed on board the plane when it got hijacked by Arabs armed with box cutters, since, as previously stated, cell phones seldom, if ever, function on a plane flying at cruising altitude. What is more, Flight 77 was not equipped with airphones, so Barbara couldn't have reached Ted that way either. Given that Ted's account of events could not possibly be accurate, one would expect a major retraction to be forthcoming from the corporate media venues which broadcast his story. One would, further, think that Olson himself would receive significant flack for lying about his final moments speaking with his wife when such an incident in fact never even occurred. What sort of man, after all, would manufacture a story like that? How could one have the gall to exploit the death of his wife with a heartbreaking tale that is in fact a lie from beginning to end? Yet, of course, no retraction has been forthcoming from CNN, ABC, or any of the print media which carried Ted Olson's story and reported it as factual. Nor has Olson himself been called to account for lying about this reported final exchange between himself and his wife. Instead, he, much like Hauer and Silverstein, has continued to be a major player amongst the American globalist power elite. He has faced no reckoning whatsoever for giving testimony which deceived the public into believing things which are plainly untrue. He has not been sued for helping to perpetuate the 19 Arabs with Boxcutters myth, which, despite being manifestly absurd, was nevertheless used as a pretext to launch two major wars of aggression, both of which resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths and untold destruction and misery across the planet.